Chapter 6. The Tea Practitioner's Exam at Football State. Last time on Tea Dojo at Football State, Damien, Marcus, Abby, Jack, and Rick went to Socrates, a one-in-a-million pub, to drink some half-priced beer. Damien and Marcus both expressed doubt in their skills. Damien had his commitment to tea questioned against his commitment to his engineering education. Marcus got anxious upon learning he may never develop his own signature chachi and be left at a serious disadvantage. After Damien drank a little too much, they went back to the tea dojo where Damien got possessed by a demon calling himself Jin. Jin was incredibly powerful and bested Abby and Jack with ease. But then, Rick revealed his own chajin, Yards, and managed to force the demon back into Damien's body, where it would lay dormant. For now. Damien flipped through his notes at record pace as he sat outside in the hallway just beyond the tea dojo. A handful of others, those confident in their skills to take the exam that would determine the future of their tea careers, stood around with him. One shorter woman with dark brown braided hair, tucked into a red baseball cap, tossed a bouncy ball against the wall. She did various tricks with it, proving to be quite adept at maneuvering it. Marcus watched her for a while, not much better to do as they waited. He checked his watch again. "What's taking so long? The exam was supposed to start 5 minutes ago," he said. Then turning to Damien. "And will you stop that? You've done all the studying you're going to get the chance to do." "Not until the last second," he said. "I'm really trying to soak in this one page." Marcus leaned over. He rolled his eyes as he saw what he expected. Damien closely studying a page of his notes with the cartoon dog with a speech bubble saying, "Heh, did you know?" Because what else would he be looking at? Marcus did wonder what the deal was with that dog. It randomly showed up in his notebook too. He assumed Damien had drawn it, but he also had seen Damien try to draw other things before, and it was not a strong suit of his. Before he had too long to consider the nature of this cartoon, the door opened and Andrew, Jack, Abby, and Rick beckoned the group waiting outside into the dojo, which was now set up with individual desks separated a good deal apart from one another. The aspiring tea practitioners took their seats. Damien sat closest to the door, the hair on his neck seeming to tingle ever so slightly just from being in the room with them. There was also Gary and Tanner from Damien's lineage, acting cheery and bright as ever. Natalie and Catherine from Marcus's lineage took the next two seats. Natalie smiled politely, looking ready for anything, and as did Catherine, but she seemed to sneak glances at Jack when she thought he wasn't looking. Danielle, who seems to have had paint splattered on her recently, took her seat as well. Marcus quickly made sure to get the seat that was 2 spaces away from her, rather than sitting right next to her. Lastly, Taylor, the girl with the baseball cap and bouncy ball, from Rick's lineage, with Danielle, sat down. Rick spoke to the 8 of them. "All right, everyone. It's interesting, right? Why are you taking this exam? You all trained for the better part of a semester to become tea practitioners. Those of you who pass will become fully fledged tea dojo members. You will gain unsupervised access to this space at any time, access to our finer teas and wares. More importantly, you will gain access to master classes, where you will learn tea techniques beyond what we've already taught you, and access to our exhibition, where we will learn from real tea masters." "But first things first, new brews," Abby chimed in. "You have to pass this exam. This exam is 4 hours in total. You will have 3.5 hours for the written portion. At some point during the exam, Rick will call you back to the Chanayu room for the 30-minute brewing portion. He will grade you on your brewing skills. Oh, and by the way, if you fail that portion, you automatically fail the whole thing." Damien swallowed some saliva nervously. Marcus just nodded his head, none of this being new information to any of the exam participants. Jack added, "Abby, Andrew, and myself will be proctoring this exam, so don't be passing notes or anything like that. For this special occasion, you've all been given tea bowls, and we'll be letting you drink some delicious hung shui oolong to help you focus over these next 4 hours. Also, much to my dismay, there's no food during this exam, so if you've brought any snacks, please finish them now." Almost like synchronized swimmers, Damien and Marcus both popped a toaster pastry from their back pockets. Danielle watched with judgmental eyes as Damien started to inhale his pocket pastry. Marcus was about to chow down on his before he heard Taylor's stomach next to him growling. "Darn, picked the wrong day to skip lunch." Marcus sighed. He broke his pastry in half and handed her one of the 2 halves. "Here, eat up. We have a lot to get through." "For real? That's pretty nice of you," she said. "I had heard from Danielle you were kind of a major jerk." The second part of that made Marcus smile for some bizarre reason. "Yeah, I pretty much am," he said. "But even I don't want someone passing out from hunger in the middle of a test." They both ate their pastries quickly and grabbed their pens and got ready to start. Abby passed out the exam to everyone. Rick waved his hand as if to signal to begin. "All right, everyone, time starts now," he said. "Damien, why don't you come back for your brewing portion first?" Damien hardly had a chance to look at his exam before being summoned. He looked back towards Marcus, who mouthed a good luck and gave him a thumbs up. He then went back into the Chanyi room for his brewing portion. Marcus stared over the test. There were several fill-in-the-blank questions on the first page, then several essay questions on the back. Each essay was assigned a specific amount of points, seemingly at random. The fill-in-the-blanks were worth 2 points each. Marcus figured it would be easiest to start with the first page. He read some of the questions. The monk who, according to Buddhist legend, cut off his own eyelids after falling asleep during meditation, and from them the first tea plant grew. His name is... Oh, that's easy. That's Bodhidharma. He wrote that down and continued reading on. During daytime, if it was raining in the vicinity of a tea plant, the stamatas would generally be... He paused. What the heck is a stomata? Did we even cover that in the botany lecture? He looked down at the page. It seemed about half of the questions were ones he did recall hearing about in lecture, and would probably be able to answer. But the other half seemed to be pulled completely at random. He stared in confusion. This portion was worth 40 points of the entire exam, and the passing rate was an 80%. At this rate, he was going to be mathematically removed from this section alone. What is going on here? He thought. There has to be something I'm missing. I was at every lecture, and I can't answer these. Damien is going to get completely destroyed on this part. He thought back to what he had heard previously about the test, that the pass rate was around 60 to 80%. He knew it was going to be brutal, and that some people would not make it. But with this, how could anyone be expected to pass? He stared as the proctors just continued to patrol about the room, carrying papers in their hands. Jack stopped to refill Tanner's tea bowl with some more boiling water. Right, I forgot I have some tea. Maybe that'll help me. Marcus took a sip. In doing so, he felt his inner chachi begin to swell. The tea was a gentle and warming presence, the roasted oolong tasting like toasted pumpkin seeds, and other various fall flavors. It left a strong impression on the back of Marcus's tongue long after he finished sipping. He became more hyper-aware of his surroundings. He began to notice something as Andrew walked past Taylor. She quickly eyed to see that no one was watching and pulled her bouncy ball back out. She took a sip of the tea and poured her tea energy into the ball, turning it invisible. She flicked her wrist and sent it against the wall of the dojo. It bounced off and then gently and unnoticeably bounced off the papers that Abby was carrying. After ricocheting off another wall, it returned to her hand. She waited for another proctor to pass her, and once she was out of line of sight of everyone, she turned the ball back to normal and seemed to write something down. She looked back at Marcus, smiling knowingly, as she was sure he saw all of that. She slid the ball back to him, and by his feet. He reached down and picked it up. He almost gasped as he saw the words, "The stomatas would generally be open." He quickly hid the ball in his pocket as the next proctor walked by. He clutched it in his hand, trembling. Was she using Chachi to cheat on her exam? To get an imprint of the answer key? That could not be what was happening. And there was no way she would be as blatant as to share this with him. Once out of sight of the three of them, he pulled it back out. The message on it had changed. Not sure if you noticed, but everyone else is doing it too. Seems like it's part of the exam. Marcus took a moment to look around discreetly. Tanner doodled a quick bird on his desk and waved a hand of his tea aura over it. Marcus saw it come to life and silently flutter around the air in the room. It scanned over the shoulders of the proctors as they walked about, and then flew back to report the answers in his ear. He saw Danielle take a sip of tea and loosen another answer key that sat in the desk and draw it towards herself. Catherine drank tea, then momentarily warped behind Abby in a perfect blind spot between all of the proctors and then warped back to write the answer down. He waited for no one to be watching him, then he rolled the ball back towards Taylor. It seemed that this was just part of the exam. Certainly, the three of them were experienced enough to detect the Chachi in the room if they needed to, but it seemed they would only act on something truly blatant and obvious. Unfortunately, Marcus had no signature Chachi ability of his own still. Worse, he was unsure how he would communicate this to Damien when he got back out of the testing room. Speaking of Damien, he sat before Rick at a low table. He was offered 3 types of tea to pick from. A Shopuer. No good. The last time he picked Shopuer, he was mostly focused on deliberately overbrewing it. Then there was a Hung Shui oolong, like the one they had in the room. Not terrible, though Damien struggled with oolongs that were shaped like balls to extract the full flavor due to how unpredictably they unfurled. Lastly was a stranded Baozhong oolong. This one seemed like a winner, a low oxidation oolong with low roasting levels. Damien picked that one. Next, Damien had to select his wares. The first of the options made him frown. It was the Demon Gaiwan. You can pick that one, but I'm not going back in it, Jin said. For the couple of weeks since Damien was originally possessed by Jin, and the tea person was sealed inside him, he still occasionally heard his voice in his head. He often only spoke for the purposes of deriding Damien, or urging him to drink so that he could be unleashed on the world once again. When ignored, Jin would lash out and verbally attack Damien at his biggest insecurities, telling him that he would never pass the exam or even be a half-decent tea practitioner. Damien tried to shake this voice from his head as he evaluated the other options. There was a standard white porcelain gaiwan, and there was a celadon gaiwan. This made Damien smile. It reminded him of Abby's gaiwan, which he thought looked really neat. The properties of the two materials would be pretty similar for making baozhong, so, purely for the nicety of aesthetics, he chose the celadon. "Please begin," Rick said. Damien brewed the tea carefully, gently pouring in a circular motion around the leaves, trying to evenly coat all of them as the hot water rained down. He cracked the lid of the gaiwan and smelled for the aroma peak. Once he thought he had it, he decanted the brew and shared it with his proctor. He tasted the tea. It was a nice herbal and vegetal brew, the slightest bit of roast giving it a more well-rounded flavor. It was on paper a well-executed brew, though it felt like it lacked a bit of finesse that would have really brought out sharper flavors. Damien worried he saw the same feelings on Rick's face. He heard laughter. "You know," Jin said, "I can lend you my powers, give you a chachi that you could never hope to have as a mortal. All you need to do is cede control over to me. What do you say?" Damien grimaced. He ignored the voice in his head and just tried on his second brew. This was the second to last shot to do something more. He poured again on the leaves, softly, not agitating them too much. He waited again and served the tea. It was fine, just like last time. It was still nothing special, though. Damien needed to get better than average on this portion. There was no way he would be able to make up the difference on the written section. He continued to hear Jin in his head laughing. "All right," he thought to himself, and his unwelcome stowaway. "You can come out then." Jin felt the seal weaken under Damien's lack of will to maintain it. He surged out of him and spectral visage behind him, cackling. He stared down at Rick, who, to his surprise, seemed not that concerned. Jin scowled at this and lunged to attack him. However, he bumped into a celadon green glass that only seemed visible after hitting it. On further inspection, Jin found himself in a kind of fishbowl of chachi suspended in the air. "Spirit cage chachi," Damien said to himself. Rick said. "Good form, but I taught you this for emergency situations, to contain him if he was leaking out." "I consider this an emergency." It took Jin just a moment to realize what had happened. The sturdy wall of chachi containing him was built over the past two brews. Now, Damien had the ability to take all of the tea energy that Jin had emerged with and channel it into himself. The red chachi swirled around and over Damien as Jin remained trapped within. Rather than growl or deride him, Jin just chuckled at this. He had exploited the tea demon's eagerness to criticize and drag him down, and turned it into strength. "Clever boy," he said. He then retreated back into Damien's life force. Damien, now charged with more chachi than he had ever wielded before, raised the kettle again. He poured in a kind of pulsing motion around the tea, his hands almost guided more than his mind. He knew, though, that on a third brew, he would have to push this tea to get the kind of flavor he wanted. He mostly covered it with the lid, then smelled. The tea still smelled fragrant, and he carefully identified the moment of the peak. Once there, he confidently poured the tea from the gaiwan. He served the tea. Then he tasted the tea. Instantly, as it hit his lips, he smiled. The delicate flowery notes, the delicious, rich, and slightly savory flavor that could only be found in oolong, all girded by a warming sensation in the roast that made one feel like they were going to sleep in a tent next to a bonfire. It was all there. He had nailed it in this moment. He saw Rick's expression as well, knowing that it was not just in his own head that he had succeeded. Though Rick did attempt to appear neutral throughout the end. "Thank you, Damien," he said. "You can return to the testing room. Have Tanner come in next." He walked back out and let them know that Tanner was up next. He seated back at his desk. The triumph he was riding quickly faded to terror as he looked down at the exam and could hardly manage any of the questions. Marcus quietly eyed him, not knowing how best to communicate with him without getting caught. He watched, though, as Damien's head suddenly shot upright. It was as if he suddenly realized the room smelled of something, but instead, it was that he realized he was engulfed in a sea of chachi. He tried to inconspicuously turn to see what was going on, and noticed that Gary, his lineage pal, seemed to be quietly conversing with the bowl on his table. As Andrew passed by a shelf of bowls, he could sense tea energy emanating off of them. It was as if under the power of Gary's chachi, the pottery in the room could converse with one another, and him. It was like he was tapping into a separate kind of aura, wielded by the craftsmen who created them. It took Damien a little less time than it took Marcus to succinctly understand what was going on. "This is like the Chunin exam from Naruto," he thought, carelessly barreling through the thinly veiled reasonable doubt this might have been an original idea. Speaking of copycat ideas, though, Damien realized that while Gary used his pottery whisper chachi, that he could sense his every movement in the back of his neck. He exploited this, mimicking his movements near perfectly to crudely write down an answer to one of the questions. The answer to the question of what is the full name of the state-run production company that historically produced most of the pu'er and is often given the acronym of CNNP. The deceptively wordy answer was China National Native Produce and Animal Byproducts Import and Export Corporation. Marcus clocked this out of the corner of his eye and shrugged. He was glad Damien seemingly picked it up so fast, but he had no idea how he managed it. Now he had to focus back inwards and figure out how he was going to find these answers without any signature Chachi ability of his own. He turned his attention to the questions he could answer. As long as he could answer them near perfectly, there might be a chance he could avoid even needing to steal the answers to the first section. Damien continued to mimic whoever he could detect answering questions. He went to see if he could start copying Catherine as she wrote an essay question about pu'er production, and suddenly, the pen he was using swerved away from the paper on its own. It was faint, but even in the sea of people using their powers, he could sense the slightest disturbance from the paper. When he examined it, he saw it was ever so slightly shimmering with tea aura. The paper is laced with a Chachi hex, similar to how Rick's thermos can't be affected by Chachi, he thought to himself. You're only able to cheat on the answers they want you to cheat on, it seems. Fair enough. Jin piped up again. Imbibe heavily of that tea, and let me come through. I will break that hex in mere moments. Come on, I shall not even demand control of your body. Damien shook his head to himself. No, I can't do that. Fair is fair. I just have to hope my learning sessions with Rick gave me enough info to rack up the points I need. Jin scoffed but went silent shortly after. Time went on and the test was nearing its end. Most people used at least 3 of the 4 hours before turning over their papers. Some, such as Damien, seemed intent to use all 4 hours to complete the exam. Danielle emerged from the back after taking her brewing portion. She looked so relieved to be done with it. And considering the trials she went through in her daily life, this was a testament to the anxiety induced by this exam. She walked by Marcus and said, You're up. Marcus let out a sigh and nodded. Danielle noticed the anxiety was too high for him to come up with one of his usual quips. He turned his paper over and headed back to the Chanayu room. Damien flashed him a quick thumbs up as he walked by before returning to his exam. Marcus entered the room and sat down before Rick. Please begin, Rick said. Marcus examined his options of teas and wares. He noticed show pu'er as one of the options and selected it. He thought it would be the easiest to extract deep and vibrant flavor out of in only 3 brews. He then peered at his options for wares. His heart dropped. Among his options was a small porcelain gaiwan, at most 2/3 of the size of a regular one. There was a glass gaiwan, known for not being of the same quality of the porcelain and celadon varieties. Lastly, there was the demon gaiwan, the beautiful porcelain vessel with detailed calligraphy down the sides of it in bright blue. Out of either irrational fear of Chajin or the rational fear that the gaiwan was known to be blistering to the touch, this one had lasted the entire exam with no one picking it. Marcus winced in pain preemptively. He knew there was no real choice. He had seen Jin leave the gaiwan with his own eyes, leaving it unpossessed. While the heat retention posed a frightening problem, keeping pu'er hot was a great way to extract the most flavor, and the other 2 options were hardly ideal in any sense. He selected it. Rick slightly nodded his head to himself, accidentally dropping his poker face and revealing that he thought it was the right option too. Marcus dosed his tea just a little more than a normal one. He wanted to minimize the amount of time he would have to hold the demon gaiwan, while still extracting the rich and complex flavors of pu'er. On the other hand, he was careful not to dose it too highly, as he would only have 3 brews, and would be pressed to get a good tea if it was overdosed. Marcus, feeling as prepared as he ever would be, raised the kettle and began to pour in a delicate circular motion on the tea. He leaned his nose in, and waited until he could get the signature earthy aroma of show coming in strong. He grabbed the gaiwan and started pouring. Marcus flinched instantly. Each second his fingers had to touch the piping hot lid felt like agony. Marcus breathed in. He called back to his Chanayu lessons. He just had to hang on a little longer this time. After the tea had decanted, Marcus set aside the lid and gaiwan as quickly as he could. He shook his hand out in the air, trying to cool it off. He served the tea to Rick and took a taste for himself. He felt a brief reprieve from how good it tasted. Floral notes were in an undercurrent of earthy and even almost savory notes. Marcus felt a surge of Chachi rush through him. Though this almost made him frown. Unlike the others, once again, he found himself in a spot where his lack of any material tea powers made him feel useless. He tried to push this out of his mind for a moment and started the next brew. He poured a bit heavier on the leaves, but not by too much. He went again to nearly fully seal the lid, leaving just enough room for him to smell. He waited until he was satisfied with the scent. Then he carefully tried to grab the gaiwan with 3 fingers, positioning them to hold it securely with the least amount of pressure and heat going through each one. As he raised it, though, the gaiwan started to slip from his fingers. In a sudden panic, he just leaned into the direction it was slipping, reasserted his grip, and began to pour. Though, in the process of doing this, his index finger was now directly in the way of the outpouring nearly boiling hot water that he decanted from his tea. Time seemed to dilate for Marcus. He swore in this moment he could count microseconds. This only made the pain he experienced that much more excruciating. He had two options: let go of the Gaiwan, possibly cracking it, essentially guaranteeing himself a failure on this portion and the exam at large. Or he could continue like this, giving himself serious burns and rendering himself useless for the final brew. There seemed to be no winning. In this collapse of time, Marcus closed his eyes and felt hopeless. But then, something happened. It was as if, with all of his heart, he called out to the tea he was brewing, and the tea he had just drank. It was like a prayer, forged in hot water, and now having every bit of flavor extracted from it. Marcus felt his hand stop hurting. At first, he thought the burns were even more severe than he thought, and caused instant nerve damage. He reopened his eyes. He saw a surge of chachi forming around his body, but highly concentrated around his hand. It was like a barrier, protecting him from all harm. It was like... "Shield chachi," Marcus said, instantly coining his new ability. Rick could not help but smile as he watched Marcus uncover his signature tea skill. Marcus finished decanting the next brew, and was every bit as vibrant and tasty as the first one. From here, the story of the brewing portion was settled. With Marcus's newfound ability, he easily performed the last brew with confidence and poise, exceeding even the first two of his brews, with steadier hands and visible conviction. He started to come down from the clouds as he returned to the exam area and was reminded of his predicament. He tapped Taylor as the last person to go in for her brewing portion. He knew this meant he had 30 minutes left on the exam. He stared at his papers. He had mostly finished all of his essays, and the other questions too, but several of the impossibly difficult questions remained. He glanced over at Damien, who seemed to be biting his pencil and gripping his head as he stared at an essay question. Marcus presumed he must have found a way to use premonition chachi to get the answers to the other questions. Marcus growled lowly to himself as he took a swig of tea. As he did this, he surged his chachi. He could shield his arms, his legs, his head, or any part of his body that he wanted to. He felt a great bittersweet feeling overtake him as he grew frustrated. "I finally have a tea power, and it's the most useless thing for this exam," he thought to himself. He just shook his head. There was no time for self-pity. He had one question down from the one he had managed to copy from Taylor. He reasoned that his performance on the brewing section was probably next to a perfect score, if not one. All he needed to do was next to perfect on all of the other questions he could answer, and he might just be able to skate through. He feverishly reviewed his essays for any additional details that he might have missed that they were looking for in an answer. He double-checked all of the questions he could on the short answer. After he wrapped this up, Jack's phone alarm went off and Taylor emerged. "All right," Abby said. "That's it. Please pass your exams forward." Everyone handed in their papers and were escorted out of the dojo for the grading to take place. They all lingered not very far from there, anticipating having someone come out shortly and give them their results. Damien sat on a bench while Marcus feverishly paced around him, muttering to himself. "Will you relax?" Damien asked. "I don't think I've ever seen you this worked up before." "I just keep thinking about the essay questions if I got all the important info in there." "Don't think about that. Think about how you unlocked your signature chachi ability. That's pretty cool. Shield chachi. I like it." "You sound patronizing." He stomped his foot. "It didn't even help me at all on the exam." "That's not true," Damien said. "It helped you on the brewing, didn't you say?" "Yeah, well." "Hey all, you can come back in now," Jack yelled from the doorway. They all filed in for the grand reveal. One by one they called people into the back. It was easy to tell from the reactions that the news was good so far. Gary, Tanner, Catherine, Natalie, Danielle, and Taylor all passed and returned with smiling faces. Rick stepped out from the doorway. "Marcus and Damien, could you both come back here?" Damien, who had been carrying hope for both of them, had his face drop immediately. No one else had been called in with another person alongside them. All eyes seemed to be on them, and the general mood of the group, bolstered by each person who had passed the exam, seemed to drop slightly. Their feet felt like bricks as they slowly staggered their way into the Chanayu room to get their results. "Do you know why I've called both of you in here together?" Rick asked, looking solemn. They looked at each other to see if they could find any clues, but both had no idea. They shook their heads. Rick let out a deep sigh and paused. "Well, it's because I'm not used to an exam where everyone passes, and I needed a way to build some tension." Damien and Marcus both blinked slowly, trying to process this. Abby shook her head. "He's a real jerkwad when he wants to be, ain't he?" Marcus and Damien hardly hesitated, both jumping into the air and high-fiving each other. They went out to share the news with everyone, and the raucous atmosphere came back to the dojo as people hugged, high-fived, and got excited for their future as tea practitioners. Rick came out to tell everyone to calm down. "Easy, people. Priceless tea wares in here," he reminded. "Now let's head over to Socrates, a 1 in a million pub, to celebrate our perfect pass rate." The group all piled out and made their way over to the dive bar. Jack and Abby grabbed Damien by the shoulders on the way out as they made their way over. Not too much celebration for you, new brew. Well, I guess regular brew now, she said, correcting herself. Yeah, we wouldn't want Jin to show up uninvited, Jack added. Yeah, I know, Damien said. I'll be good. Marcus turned his head and waved Damien over. Come on, slowpoke. Last one to Socrates is an overbrewed shungpuer. Overbrewed shungpuer? No way that's me. Something that bitter must be you. The two ran off ahead of the pack, racing towards their destination. Their adventures as tea practitioners just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this chapter of Tea Dojo at Football State. If you enjoyed, please rate the podcast, give it a like on YouTube, or share with someone else you think might also enjoy. You can stay up to date with Tea Dojo at Football State by following us on social media. There'll be D-Squared stories on just about any of the major platforms. If you prefer reading to listening stories, also follow us on Substack, also D-Squared Stories. Thanks again for listening, and I hope to have you listen again next week.